to the weekly Defence Podcast, the show about defence procurement, military technology, and the industry that gets the kit into the hands of the warfighter. We're brought to you in partnership with our sponsor Nammo. I'm your host Helen Haxel, Air Domain Editor here at Sheppard Media, and I'm coming to you from our global headquarters from a rather sunny West London. But before we kick off, we'd love to hear what you think of our new podcast, so please do subscribe and give us a review on iTunes or on the platform site that you use. On the show this week, our air reporter Tim Martin speaks to Boeing about the Block 2 developments for the CH-47 Chinook, an upgrade package to meet the US Army's requirements for greater payload limits, featuring several modifications that add up to notable performance increase. I will also be speaking with Scott Gawley, our SOF editor, about Marine West last week, which he attended, and to hear what he learnt from the event in California. And our sponsor Nammo provides this week's Industry Voice segment. But first, our weekly news roundup, and I'm here with Richard Thomas, Editor-in-Chief.
Hey there.
And Beth Maundrell, Deputy Editor Land.
Hiya, Helen.
To talk about what's caught their eye this week. Richard, what news has been swimming your way this week on the C desk?
Very good. You don't stop, do you? No, that's excellent. Lots of stuff has come our way, and actually I've done some work this week. Everything you hear has been written by myself, so I've actually done some bylines, which is good. We have a couple of contract announcements, one from the North American region and another one from the Asia Pacific. In no particular order, I will kick off in North America, I think, and this is the agreement from Irving Shipbuilding to award a contract to finalise the design work for the Canadian Surface Combatant. This class will replace the Canadian Navy's Halifax and Iroquois class frigates. As prime, Irving will build the 15 ships at its Halifax shipyard to, of course, a design derived from the UK Royal Navy's Future City class Type 26 frigates, also a design chosen by Australia. When complete, the combined UK, Canadian and Australian fleets will total up to 32 vessels, providing the UK doesn't cut a few more from its programme.
So, Rich, considering that it's a UK design, obviously it's great for the Canadian Navy to be getting this capability, but what does it mean for Canadian industry?
A lot of money and a lot of investment, obviously. As is common with such programmes, the amount of domestic input is key in ensuring that these vessels are seen as a military but also a national and industrial success story. Lockheed Martin, in a release, described lasting economic benefits to the tune of billions and billions of dollars. The class will also see the Canadian-developed combat management system CMS-330 included, and CAE will oversee the training integration for the class. So the design phase will run for about 3 years before the steel is cut, which is currently thought likely to occur between 2021, 2024, something like that. And the second agreement to which I was referring to has seen the Naval Group and Australia finally sign off on the Strategic Partnership Agreement after several years of negotiations, 3 years of negotiations, but that's quite a long time nevertheless. And this will produce the future submarine capability for the Royal Australian Navy. It will be 12 conventional submarines. However, during the telephone briefing ahead of the actual signing and the announcement, it emerged that the first-in-class boat, which will be known as HMAS Attack, may not arrive to the Navy for operational test and evaluation until the 2032-2033 timeframe. Previously been thought that the first boat would arrive around 2030, 2031. So this design phase will run for about 4 years, after which construction would begin, and it could take up to 10 years to complete the first boat. Although that said, Naval Group officials were keen to stress that they won't compromise capability of the platform in order to speed things up or just make a quick fix.
It's always interesting, isn't it, though, Rich? Like, these ship programs, whether it's submarines or surface vessels, are always like really long periods of time for contracts, design and development. It seems like for this kind of stuff, there's no real quick fix, as it were.
Quick fixes? Well, it depends who you ask. I mean, it looks like the UK is trying to do a quick fix to fix some of its naval problems. Gavin Williamson, the Secretary of State for Defence, announced just this week during a speech at RUSI a number of things, but among them will be the acquisition or procurement of 2 littoral future littoral strike ships, which will form the centerpieces for littoral strike groups. Each will focus on the Atlantic Mediterranean region and the Middle East and Asia Pacific region. Costs haven't really been divulged that much. During the speech, Williamson said that the UK needed to be more competitive in how it procures military capabilities, which sometimes meant they wouldn't be able to acquire or develop completely new kit, gold-plated kit, but maybe make do with something from the commercial or civil sector. So affordability is a key problem for the MOD. How the UK will even afford to fill the ships with various platforms, with helicopters, or even crew them is, another problem that was handily glossed over, obviously. Helen, what's in the air?
Well, if I may be so bold to begin with, team, one particular news story which has caught my eye is a special operations piece by Andrew White, just one of our many correspondents here at Sheppard Towers, or as he's more commonly known as, Chalky. Now, Chalky wrote a recent report from the Joint Special Operations University, which discussed readiness and resilience of special operation forces, which could be extended through an increased emphasis on yoga and meditation. Now, this report, which is cleverly titled Warrior Pose Building Readiness Through Resilience, Yoga and Meditation, was published at the beginning of February by the Tampa-based university. So they're saying that yoga and meditation classes could be used to, and I quote, create a more ready, resilient force capable of identifying and defeating the adversary.
How?
Working with our partners and protecting vital interests at home and abroad. Now, the report, Richard, discussed how breathing-based exercises, including yoga, systematic relaxation, breathing and meditation, could be easily translated into the military environment with its emphasis on physical fitness and training. Anyway, thank you for indulging me on that. But towards the skies, and more specifically Russian ones, Russian helicopters has reported that it has completed the preliminary flight testing phase of the, and I'm going to have to use those meditation techniques now because it's a long title, the Mi-26 Tango 2 Victor helicopter, which is a new generation heavy aircraft for the Russian Army aviation branch.
So, quite a big programme then, I guess, Helen. What's next for the Mi-26 Tango 2? I think you might have to take it from
Victor. Pertinent question, Beth, thank you. The next steps of this programme are the more comprehensive joint flight testing, which is set to be undertaken together with the Russian MOD. Now, this is planned for completion in Q1 of this year, and then the helicopter will be submitted to the third phase of the so-called joint state flight testing by the Russian MOD, where it will evaluate the aircraft's overall suitability for commissioning in service with the Russian military. It's also worth noting that its maiden flight was in August last year.
So once testing and all that good stuff's completed, what do you think they will be actually using this helicopter for?
Well, Beth, it's also going to have a new avionics suite on board, and it's going to be used for routinely operating from unprepared landing sites and in all weathers. So that's going to include extremely cold Arctic conditions, where it will resupply the growing network of military installations built in deep, frozen, remote regions of Russia and beyond, I'm sure.
So the Baltics have got nothing to worry about then?
Beth, what's been keeping your feet on the ground this week on the land domain?
So actually this week, Poland made a pretty big announcement as it was confirmed that the Eastern European nation will spend up to $414 million on new US-made rocket launchers. Now, the rocket launchers will be the Lockheed Martin M142 HIMARS system, which can launch up to 6 guided rockets. This would be one of the first European exports for the HIMARS system, as other users include Jordan, the UAE, Singapore, and of course the domestic market, the US. It does appear that this contract would cover the acquisition of around 20 of the systems. Now, as we discussed in previous podcasts, Poland's increasing its naval capability, but it's also continuing to increase its land-based defences, as this contract announcement kind of highlights. And this is mainly over concerns of a resurgent Russia not too far away. But what is interesting as well, though, is this kind of like shows how Poland's ties with the US are pretty strong at the moment. It's well known that last year the country signed a multi-billion-dollar contract for the US-made Patriot ground-based air defense system from Raytheon, and the country is now looking to continue the acquisition of such equipment through phase 2 of the programme, as well as a shorter range air defence system that could accompany Patriot. This could be a European-made system, but I mean, I would kind of think that they might be leaning towards keeping everything US-based. This week as well, Vice President from the US, Mike Pence, and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo headlined a conference in Warsaw. This conference saw the press opportunity for them to sign the contract and have a bit of a photo op in Poland. Yeah. Poland also continues to push for the US to have a permanent base within its borders. However, whether this will...
That's probably going to be a hard sell if you consider the resistance that the US has had in keeping the forces that it has in South Korea. And South Korea, of course, are having to pay more to the US just to keep those troops there. To get the US to commit permanently to Poland might be a tough one to do, no?
Yeah, the US hasn't committed to that at the moment, and really it doesn't align with current US administration thinking. However, there has been news that the US ambassador to Poland has said that the number of troops in Poland could be increased, but there's not going to be a permanent US base there. So it's definitely a country that's spending a lot of money, and it's one that we'll continue to follow here at Shephard. Yeah. Finally, though, an interesting one that came across the land desk this week from our Asia Pacific editor, Gordon Arthur, who reported that during an Independence Day parade in Sri Lanka, the army showed off an indigenously made multiple rocket launcher. Now, I would encourage anyone that's listening
to visit the website.
And
if ever a picture could actually speak 1,000 words, that's it. So
yeah,
check it out.
I mean, how effective this rocket launcher would actually be. From the picture, you'd think not all the tubes kind of look like they're pointing in the same direction. Yeah. The system does appear to be a 10-tube rocket launcher, and the Sri Lankan developers have a goal that this could be increased to a 20-barrel version. I mean, like we said, go and have a look. And
I'm sceptical, Beth.
Yeah. But interestingly, the system has been developed to fire Chinese, Pakistani and Czech 120mm rockets that are already in service with the Sri Lankan army. So there's clearly a vision for the system's future.
Thanks, Beth. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you.
I'm here with Adam Wakeling, the technical guru here at Sheppard Media, who's going to tell us a little something about Sheppard Studio. Adam, you've been on the front lines of developing the co-branded content for Studio. What kind of solutions have been created under the Studio banner?
Thanks, Helen. I'm not sure about guru, but I guess I'll take it. So Studio is our co-branded content offering, which gives industry a more creative way to tell their stories. Every project we've done has been bespoke, and we've worked closely with many of the major defence and aerospace primes around the world. In each project, they brought Studio on board to develop content to support a particular campaign that they've been focusing on. Some examples include that I've personally worked on was Airbus helicopters at Heli Expo, where we spent the week filming with them, all the stories that they wanted to tell at that show. We spoke to their customers and operators of the platforms, and added that, journalistic touch to their video coverage, which otherwise wouldn't have been possible. We also did the same a few months back with Raytheon at Farnborough International Air Show, talking to the various business areas within that company and telling each of their stories. Outside of video, we've done some smaller projects, including webinars, content pieces, special reports, all sorts really. I think the great thing about Studio is the fact that we can get really creative in helping industry tell their stories in new and exciting ways, and then getting that content out to the people that they really want to target. And I'm really excited personally about what the projects could be next. We've got some in the pipeline already, but unfortunately I can't tell you about those just yet, but stay tuned.
Well, there you have it. Thanks, Adam. If you're interested in learning more about studio projects and how they could benefit your company, please contact us at our website, shepherd.studio. I'm joined by Scott Gawley, our SOF editor here at Shepherd Media, who last week attended Marine West at Marine Corps Base Cape Pendleton in California. As I understand, Scott, this is a closed event. It's not for the public and has attendees from civilians to military personnel. And last week you covered topics from unmanned programs, fire support to amphibious combat vehicles. Now, if you could, Scott, I'd love for you to indulge us in some of the points of order that you covered last week from Marine West.
I'd be happy to do that, Helen. Marine West, sometimes called Marine Corps West, was held aboard Camp Pendleton, California. It's really one of a trio of Marine Corps military expos in an annual geographic cycle that includes Marine South at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina in April, a Modern Day Marine at Quantico in September, and Marine West, which is a great event at Camp Pendleton in February. At Camp Pendleton, it's supported by 1st Marine Expeditionary Force, Marine Corps Installation Command West, and the Marine Corps League. And as you said, it brings together industry and Marine Corps organizations to highlight technologies, equipment, and even some training solutions. So one of the stories that came out of Shepherd attendance there this week involved the Marine Corps' look at their small unmanned aircraft system fleet. And they currently have 3 programs of record: the RQ-20B Puma, the RQ-11B Raven, and the RQ-12A Wasp. They're all backpackable systems. They're used for local reconnaissance, surveillance, and target acquisition. In addition to those 3 programs of record, the Marine Corps is currently looking at 4 additional small and micro unmanned aircraft systems: Indigo, Sky Ranger, Instant Eye, and the PD-100 Black Hornet. Those are all out in Marine units right now, fielded under urgent need statements. And the Marine Corps is gathering field user evaluations to possibly expand its program of record to include 1 or more of those systems. So that was a great story. Another story that we filed last week involves Marine Corps efforts to consolidate their amphibious combat vehicle programs. And the story actually started earlier in the week at another event, which was the annual Tactical Wheeled Vehicles Conference in Monterey. At that conference, representatives from the Marine Corps Program Executive Office for Land Systems briefed vehicle portfolios. We followed up with them at Marine Corps West. Basically, up until now, the Marine Corps has had Amphibious Combat Vehicle 1.1 and Amphibious Combat Vehicle 1.2 programs, with a vision that 1.2 would be expanded follow-on capabilities. The main expanded capabilities was a swim capability, according to the Marines. And the design that they picked for ACV 1.1 has proven out with an excellent swim capability. Based on that, they went ahead to their acquisition authority and requested permission to merge the 2 programs into one. So we will no longer have a 1.1 and a 1.2 platform. There will just be an ACV platform. The remaining hurdle there, and it's probably not much of a hurdle, they have to go to Congress, where they have 2 different funding lines, and they'll have to get congressional approval to merge those lines. And that'll probably occur maybe in the April timeframe. Another story we picked up down there, AM General. It was highlighting its new fire support mobility designs. And AM General has, for the last few years, had a system they call Hawkeye. It places a 105 millimeter cannon on a modified Humvee. They've shown it several places, and Hawkeye, they believe, has now taken on new interest based in large part on the fact that the Marine Corps has removed its expeditionary fire support systems, its 120 millimeter mortars, from its tactical units. They did that last year. So AM General now believes that Hawkeye, that 105, provides a gap filler, highly mobile, effective, and that was one of the reasons they were showing it at Marine West. In addition, they talked about a couple of other platforms they've been working on. One of them is they've placed a 155 millimeter cannon on an FMTV 5-ton truck, and they fired that late last year at Fort Sill, Oklahoma in demonstrations. For the Marines, they said that the user community has asked them to put that same 155 millimeter cannon, which is the same cannon used on the M777 towed howitzer that the Marines have. And they've been asked to test it or put it onto an MTVR Marine Corps truck. Those discussions are still underway. They haven't cut metal yet, but that was just another example of the stories that come out of Marine West.
Thanks for that, Scott. I'm sure you'll continue to explore those programs throughout this year and beyond. But your compass is still continuing to point west, though, and you're now heading to San Diego for West 2019. So can you just share some details on that event, Scott?
Absolutely. West 2019, which is certainly the largest naval show on the West Coast, it's co-sponsored by AFCEA International and the U.S. Naval Institute. Down in San Diego, it brings together platform makers, technology designers, and service representatives. One of the great things about West is the level of support it gets from across the services. So speakers will include the Chief of Naval Operations, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, and the Commandant of the Coast Guard. It's a great venue, and the main program is supplemented by a number of smaller, what they call engagement theaters that provide we'll say, more intimate venues for panel presentations and deeper discussions. As the editor of Special Operations Forum for Shephard, pretty excited about one of the planned panels, which will include the new Naval Special Warfare Commander, Rear Admiral Colin Green. But we plan to file stories from across the naval spectrum there.
Thanks again, Scott. Always a pleasure to speak with you.
It's my pleasure, Helen. Thank you.
I'm here with Matt Smith, our Director of Analysis at Sheppard Media. Hi, Matt.
Hi, Helen.
Matt, you and your team have been working tirelessly on the Shephard Plus business intelligence service. So what can we expect from Shephard Plus in 2019 in terms of further developments or upgrades to the system?
So our database provides information on who is buying which military equipment. That's the core of it. Each record contains information on order and delivery numbers, unit costs, and product attributes. Our clients use Shephard Plus really to identify market opportunities, to track and assess their competitors, and benchmark their own analysis. So we're shortly going to add a naval warfare module, and we plan to expand our coverage further to include combat aircraft. We're also developing a programs module, which will cover unawarded procurement programs. The idea behind this is to give more insight into what's going on in the future with equipment programs. And our first program forecast will cover military vehicles, and we expect that to have that ready in March.
A one-stop plus shop.
Exactly, yes.
So thanks for giving us that overview of the Plus Intelligence tool. If you want further information on this, please email plus@shephardmedia.com or visit our website.
I'm delighted to be joined by Randy Roth, the Director of Business Development for Cargo Helicopters at Boeing, as we discuss Block 2 developments for the CH-47. Randy, the program itself is an upgrade effort effectively to increase the lift capability of the CH-47. Could you maybe indicate the major components that are being overhauled on the program?
Sure can, Tim. First, let me say thanks for the opportunity to speak about a topic that I will always jump at the opportunity to talk about, and that's the Chinook helicopter program, one of the iconic platforms in the rotary wing world that's been flying around for quite a while. So you mentioned that Block 2 is a upgrade package, and that's absolutely what the start of it was and what's going to be delivered. As I said, Chinooks have been flying since the early 60s, but just like 737 that somebody got on in the late 60s, early 70s, the ones today are not the ones that were built then. And over time, the aircraft has been upgraded multiple times. The latest upgrades, the ones that are now constituting the Block 2 program, really are focused on the U.S. Army's desire to increase the payload capability of the aircraft. So when the F Block 1s first came off the line in 2005, 2006, one of their key performance parameters was to be able to carry 16,000 pounds of cargo at certain atmospheric conditions over a certain distance. And that aircraft is absolutely capable of doing that and would be capable of doing it today, except for in that last almost 15 years of time, the aircraft has, if you will, gained weight. So the Army has added to it really capable, important systems, whether they be survivability equipment that can either dazzle or confuse missiles, whether it is ballistic protection they've put on to protect the soldiers and the air crew. But all of those and additional capabilities that come in black boxes. So what that's done is that's eroded some of the actual payload for the ground commander to move around. So Block 2 focused on that, led us to a few areas in which to focus our efforts. The first of which is a new rotor blade that by itself in high hot conditions will increase the lift of the aircraft by over 1,500 pounds. An improved drivetrain. So we have made some small adjustments to the drivetrain that have resulted in being able to pass 10% more torque from the engines into that rotor system, and then an improved and beefed up structure of the aircraft so that we can increase the max gross weight by about 4,000 pounds. And the cumulative effort of those three major areas buys back that payload that's been eroded over time and then some, and provides that to the commanders. So those are really the major areas. There are some other small areas. Once you start to make those, then you take the opportunity. We're improving the fuel system a bit by putting one consolidated tank on each side of the aircraft rather than the three that are there today. Most folks wouldn't know that. And when you look at a Chinook, that there's actually 3 fuel tanks on either side. We'll make that one. That's simpler, fewer pumps, fewer hoses, less things that can go wrong. We're improving the electrical system slightly, but really it's those 3 major efforts that make a Block 2 a Block 2. And then the last piece of that I think is important is by increasing that max gross weight to 54,000 pounds, we now put it at the same usage spectrum as the special ops variant, the MH-47G. And that's really important, especially for them, because now, since both aircraft will be in that same weight and G load and everything else that goes into determining life components or component lives, now everybody can share in that big part system. So you'll hear sometimes talking about commonality between the F and the G, and that's where that is. So again, those are the major elements. And we're progressing on, moving out smartly and building those and delivering those to the Army to start with.
Right. Okay. And I suppose when you mentioned moving out from a business perspective, moving from the development side of things, how many contracts does Boeing now hold at present? And can you give us kind of some insight into the latest development for each of those contracts?
Sure. So it started, we actually had some small, we called them delivery orders back prior to when Block 2 became a program of record. So if you go back prior to 2017, we had some smaller contracts with the Army on the development of the blade, some of the drivetrain, some of the electrical system. But it all culminated in July of 2017 when we got on contract with the Army for the EMD phase, that engineering, manufacturing, development phase of Block 2. And that's a 4-year contract, started in 17, will culminate in 2021 when we build 3 aircraft, we do flight test on them, and then that informs the Army to make a decision in 2021 to go into low rate initial production and start the production of the actual F Block 2s. So that's the main contract. At the same time, our special ops community has signed two production contracts. They have a Lot 1 contract that we signed earlier in 2018, and then the U.S. Congress actually authorized funding for 4 additional aircraft in 2018 that we went on contract at the same time. So those 3 contracts make up the ones today that we're working off of. And I will tell you that I said that the EMD builds 3 aircraft. Something that's somewhat unusual for a large development program is those 3 aircraft. We went on contract in July of 17, and the first aircraft is in the paint shop today. It's already finished assembly, being painted. It will be in our delivery center within the next week and a half, and we should be flying that aircraft within the next month and a half, I would say. And that will be a huge development for something that's only been on contract for a year. And we are actually several weeks ahead of schedule and under cost on that development program. And the 2 other aircraft are following close behind. So really looking forward to getting the aircraft in the air, showing what it can actually do, and proving out that Block 2 is the aircraft that the Army wants.
Okay, and that EMD flight test phase, how long will that last, and what really will be evaluated?
Sure. It will actually do that testing out in Mesa, Arizona. Weather out there is far more conducive to flight tests than it is here in Philadelphia. So it is roughly, in the simplest terms, the EMD contract, I said it was a 4-year contract. It's basically kind of 2 years to build the aircraft and 2 years to test the aircraft. We're going to build them a little bit quicker than 2 years, and we will test them in a little bit quicker than 2 years. But then at the end, you have to capture all the results, put the reports together, analyze the data you get, so that the Army then is fully informed as they go into that low rate initial production decision in 2021, early 2021.
Okay, and I suppose if we wind the clock back a little bit to October of last year, there was some concern that the program itself could be threatened by DoD budget cuts. And now that we know that the contracts for the special ops are there and the EMD is moving out, does that give Boeing kind of confidence that the program itself, is through tentative issues or threat that those budget threats are no longer an issue?
Well, actually, I would say that our concern has not been dissuaded since October of 2018. We don't have anything formal. When the president's budget comes out, it was supposed to come out the first Monday in February. Now we're hearing it'll be the middle of March. That would be the first opportunity in writing we would see the Army's full intention of what to do. Just to be clear, when that solicitation notice came out from the Army for that LRIP, low rate initial production contract notification, that's really, the Army following their process that they have to. It's a sole source contract, so they have to notify all parties that they intend on entering a sole source contract with Boeing for these aircraft. That I wouldn't say that presupposes that all the funding is there, because they have to operate off of the last known information they have, and the last known information was last year's budget, that the money was in there. So we, again, will know far more when the president's budget is released next month. And remember, this is for. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Tim.
Now, just to be clear, Randy, that's a call for up to 14 aircraft, the IDIQ that you're talking about, yes?
Correct. It is structured as it's for 2 years, a range of 4 to 7 each year. So up to 14 aircraft over 2 years. That would be the first 2 lots of a low rate initial production run. And we're preparing the proposal for that. We're ready to get the request for proposal from the Army, preparing our proposal to give back to them. As you might expect, that's a rather lengthy process to write that, give it to them to review, and then start negotiations. So all in support of a early 2021 contract, if you back that up, it makes good sense that that would get released now. So it's a long run between now and early 2021. I'm sure there'll be many twists and turns. And at the moment, we're focusing on executing that which we have been asked to do, which is build those aircraft and flight test them, and then we will help the Army make good choices.
Okay. And so looking ahead, the Army could opt for 500 of the Block 2 aircraft. How would that impact the Philadelphia production line, particularly as Block 1 winds down?
Well, so that has been the long-term plan for Chinook. First off, it really starts, I know that we here live in Philadelphia, think a lot about the Philadelphia community and the Philadelphia production line. But the two other aspects that are so important are the warfighter out there who's flying the aircraft and what they need, and then also our supply base throughout all the country and the world, the well over almost 300 suppliers we have and how it impacts them. But the Block 2 has been foreseen as delivering that capability for the next 15 to 20 years, that newest and best capability for the warfighter, and keeping this facility humming so that you can maintain that expertise for anything else that the Army or any other customer might want. So it's critically important to the production line. For example, there are a little over 900 Chinooks flying throughout the world. So if the U.S. has 500 of them, you can see that international support in itself would be difficult to sustain a real healthy level of production here. And we understand that production goes in ebbs and flows, but this is at a very good rate. Somewhere between 30 and 35 aircraft total a year would be a good rate to carry out for the foreseeable future. And just do the math. If it's close to 500 aircraft at 30 a year, let's call it, we're looking between 15 and 20 years of production, and an opportunity for the Army then to develop their next set of requirements.
Right. And you briefly mentioned the international community and the importance of Chinook worldwide. At what point might Block 2 be ready for export customers, or have they thought along those lines at this stage?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question, Tim. So, we have the Block 1, which is kind of towards its end and scaling down, and we have international customers who are getting those right now, who are also interested in that. And then Block 2, as it ramps up, a somewhat logical point, and one that we've been working with the Army on, is when the Army goes into full rate production, which we would expect them to make that decision in the 2023, 2024 timeframe, after they've been in LRIP for a couple years. Once they go into full rate production, I think that is a very logical time for internationals to have that be one of the offerings that then they can purchase. At the same time, it's interesting that the way Block 2 is constructed, they can even get some of those technologies ahead of time, or at least be positioned to incorporate them once they become available. So that's one of the things we're working with each individual customer, because as you might expect, they all have their own priorities of needs, is how do we get them capability today with a path to even greater capability in the future. That may or may not include bringing the aircraft back to turn them into Block 2. It might be just incorporating newer technologies out there where they are. So, but back to your original question, yeah, we would expect it in that 23, 24 timeline to be a full up Block 2 offered. At that point, it'd be through all the flight testing, it'd be into low rate initial production. The risk would be significantly lower to any international, and then they can drive on from there.
Yeah, I mean, until that time, I guess we can't really second guess what the Army are going to do. But Randy, thanks so much for speaking with us. It's been a pleasure.
No, it's been a real joy. Like I said, I always take the opportunity to talk about a wonderful program, and thanks for giving me that chance.
Likewise, thank you.
So welcome to this week's Industry Voice. This is the part of the show that's brought to you in partnership with Namo. I'm Tony Skinner, VP of Content here at Sheppard Media, and I'm joined again by Andre Lander, who's the SVP of Communications for Namo. So Andre, we've covered several topics over the past few weeks. and your insight has always been really valuable. So what's on your mind this week?
Well, it's a couple of things. The first thing I just wanted to mention is something I think a lot of people are probably following these days, and that is the upcoming U.S. presidential budget. I'm very curious to see what the long-term implications will be if it will be caught up in the general political debate in the U.S., and that we will end up in a situation which we had a couple of years ago where the Defense Department also is caught up in the shutdown debate and in the overall political process. And I think it's been a very beneficial part for the DoD that they've had 2 years of relative stability, been able to follow up on programs, get long-standing concerns addressed. And I think industry in general is looking at this quite apprehensively in terms of, okay, what will this lead to? Will we be able to continue the progress we've seen, or will we see another round of quite vicious debate?
I guess this is a continuing budget conflict over in the US. I mean, we saw sequestration 5 or 6 years ago influencing, the defense budgets quite heavily. I guess the comments we heard at that time from both, program managers sort of off the record and companies on the record was it was hard to do business in that environment. It was hard to plan. Even if your program was going to be cut, you would rather that decision being made than these kind of budget indecisions sort of lingering on kind of due to, conflict and debate on Capitol Hill.
Well, our concern as always is how can we actually fulfill our promises when we make them. So when we enter into a contract, we make a promise that we're going to deliver on something. And then we need some predictability so we can invest, so that we can put the resources out there, we can bring in the right people. And we're mainly concerned that we will struggle to be able to do so. And I think the long-term concern that both the U.S. defense industry and the DoD are concerned with is what will this do to the ability to continue to innovate and bring in new technologies and new programs? Because one of the concerns when you have continuing resolutions, for instance, is that you cannot initiate new programs. You can't kick off new contracts or get funding for bringing out a new capability and you are left with trying to manage and upgrade what you have in a much larger degree. So I think that's meant that the U.S. has pulled in allies and European partners to bring in new technologies, and that also shows the value of international cooperation there. But the U.S. is still the largest piece of the global defense industry and sector, and it really needs direction and focus and being able to move forward. And that's something that I think a lot of people within the industry is looking at very closely right now.
And where do you think the main effect is felt in that regard? I mean, is it the programs that are ready to move into production that are perhaps a bit more near-term requirements, or is it the longer-term R&D activities that are curtailed, by kind of budget indecision and programs just sort of not advancing?
I think it's a longer-term part. I mean, if it's already a program of record, it's already something that's in the budget, then that's definitely and that's less affected in short term. But it's that ability to initiate new programs and get large initiatives underway. And I think that's something that from the industry side, how can we support them in the best way possible? And how can we do that when we have that level of uncertainty? That's always a challenge.
Great. And anything else on your mind this week?
Well, I just want to give a very, very brief shout out to a initiative that's coming up. Some people may have heard about what's called the Aerospace Media Dinner. It's held every year in advance of the major European air show, either Farnborough or Paris. And this year it's in Paris in June. And the day before the show opens, there is a media awards dinner held, and it's the nominations for those awards has just opened. So I would just encourage everyone to head to aerospacemediadinner.com and look at the call for nominations page there. We're the sponsors of the Best Young Journalist Award, but there's a number of other award categories, and I think there's been some excellent defense reporting going on in the past year, and I would encourage everyone who has noticed someone who they feel is worthy of some special recognition to submit a nomination there. And I'm really looking forward to that myself, and we're going to be sponsoring that award category for the 4th time. So I'm very much looking forward to it.
Great, and we'll post a link to that aerospace media dinner in our show notes as well. So thanks for your time again, Andre. Always great to talk.
Thank you.
This episode of Shephard's Weekly Defence Podcast was brought to you by our sponsor, Nammo. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, please head over to shepherdmedia.com to access all our news stories and subscriber content. We'd love to hear what you thought of the podcast, so please do subscribe, rate, and give a review on iTunes or other podcasting platforms. Thanks for listening.